Hello everyone and welcome back to Rich History. In tonight's video, in light of the recent snowstorm, we're going to be talking about what US soldiers wore during the Battle of the Bulge. In late 1944, with the Allies moving rapidly across Europe, the Germans launched a massive offensive to halt the Allied march. Over 200,000 German troops smashed through Allied lines, seizing control of crossroads, ammo dumps, and other tactically important features. The Germans were trying to halt the Allied offensive by breaking through the lines and taking out the Antwerp port, which would significantly weaken the Allied offensive. First things first, let's take a look at the uniforms that a US soldier would have worn around the time of the Bulge. So starting off here, the basic uniform that was worn by US soldiers during World War II was the M37 or M42 wool uniform. So that consisted of here a wool shirt and wool pair of trousers. During the Battle of the Bulge, jackets worn varied. You see a mix of tanker jackets, M41s, and M43s. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to be taking a look at the M43 field jacket, which you can see here. So the M41, which this was an improvement on, was based off of civilian windbreaker designs. It was made out of like a cotton poplin with a wool lining. Didn't have much storage space. Was generally frowned upon by the troops. So this right here was the new improvement. And you can see it has 4 pockets for better storage. It's made out of a green color, which is better for camouflage and just generally a better jacket. Underneath the M43 here, you can see a 5-button wool sweater worn, and this is actually an original one dated 1944. Like jackets, shoes worn during the Bulge varied. This right here is going to be probably your most common type that you see though in photos. This is what's called a M43 double buckle boot, which you can tell because of the double buckles. These boots were an improvement on the service shoes, which were about ankle high and had canvas gaiters, and these were notoriously difficult to put on, and so the improvement here solved that problem by just adding more boot, which was secured by the double buckles. The Battle of the Bulge provided unique environmental challenges for US soldiers during World War II. A U.S. Army historic study states that the weather that occurs in the Ardennes and Eifel terrain during the winter is generally severe, and it was in 1944. We've already talked about the 5-button sweater and the M43 jacket, which both serve well in the cold, but probably the most common item used for cold weather that is seen in the Bulge is the wool overcoat, and this is made out of a very heavy wool. It is very, very warm. It comes down to about the ankles, and it's just a wonderful piece of military ingenuity. Not all warm weather gear came from the military. There were some more unorthodox methods of acquiring winter wear, and the Red Cross, most notably, made scarves and head coverings and gloves and things like that, and they would send them over to the troops. And soldiers could also request items from their families at home, and then they could, get things like gloves and scarves. They could also find these things locally, whether that be, through looting or whether it was given to them by a local in a combat zone. I heard a story about a U.S. soldier, I think this was in 1945, who went into a home and found a women's fur coat and cut the collar off and then sewed it onto the collar of their M43 jacket, and that was the way that they kept warm. Field gear, of course, depended on the role, but for an infantryman carrying the M1 Garand, the equipment reflected that. Most soldiers would carry a cartridge belt that had 10 pockets for the 8-round clips for the M1 Garand. Hanging off of this belt would be a canteen and a canteen pouch, first aid packet, sometimes an entrenching tool depending on the situation, and the M1 Garand bayonet. For additional ammunition, soldiers would sometimes carry 1 to 2 bandoliers. The helmet worn by US soldiers during World War II was the M1, which was a 2-part design, dividing the helmet into shell and liner. Camouflage nets were sometimes worn on the helmet, so you could stick foliage in to camouflage oneself. Sometimes white material from houses like bed sheets and pillow casings were scavenged and used as camouflage covers. Other items for the soldier were carried either in an emptied out gas mask bag or a haversack, sometimes a musette bag if you were an officer or in a specified role. Prior to the Bulge, most soldiers realized that the Germans probably weren't going to use gas warfare, and so a lot of them discarded their gas masks and used the bags as, just carry-ons, basically. Keeping morale up was vital during the Battle of the Bulge, and food, comfort, and entertainment were very important factors. Personal items carried by the soldiers varied from person to person. Soldiers would have carried a mess kit and utensils, seen here. They also would have carried ration items and ration supplements such as toilet paper, cigarettes, little food items, things like of that nature. Soldiers carried items to maintain their personal health and appearance, such as maybe a sewing kit, scissors, as far as health goes, shaving cream, dental cream. A portable stove would have been a hot commodity in the Bulge, no pun intended, because of the cold climate. Something that provided warm food would have been extremely valuable to a soldier. Some entertainment material carried by soldiers could have included language guides, Bibles, and religious material, song books, or Armed Service Edition novels, which were books from back home that were condensed into carryable sizes for soldiers on the front. Mail was also probably the most important morale factor for soldiers, as they relied on that, link to their lives back home while they were overseas. Souvenirs were also very popular with soldiers, whether that be little trinkets from countries visited or captured enemy materials such as, flags, weapons, or insignia. Of course, these things weren't always carried by every single soldier. Like I mentioned, it, varied from person to person and what they were able to get their hands on at a given time. The search for warmth, comfort, entertainment, and combat ability all factored into the kit that was carried by soldiers during the Battle of the Bulge. Despite the harsh conditions and combat faced, soldiers of the U.S. Army turned the tide against the Germans, making it impossible for the Germans to mount another serious counteroffensive during the war. Well, that about wraps it up. If you like this kind of stuff, like and subscribe and leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.